What happens when political pride refuses to listen to science? What separates a natural risk from an epic disaster? And how can a crucial window of just 8 hours seal the fate of an entire city? To understand how 23,000 people were condemned in a single night, we need to look at the clear warnings that were given and, most crucially, at the exact moment the decision to ignore them was made. This is the tale of the fatal error that unfolded on November 13, 1985, when the tragedy of Armero, eruption of Nevado del Ruiz, transformed a known threat into a nightmare. Scientists warned of the imminent wave of volcanic mud, a lahar. But the time between the first tremor and the arrival of the mud was wasted in bureaucracy, resulting in 23,000 lives lost, wiped off the map by a silent avalanche of rock and water. 13/11/1985. The 8-hour error that buried 23,000 lives marks today. There's history. But it was not merely a natural disaster. It was proof that time and the failure to act can be the cruelest killers. On that night, the full force of nature manifested as a lahar, a catastrophic wave of volcanic mud, rock, and water, traveling down the slopes of the Nevado del Ruiz volcano at speeds reaching 60 km/h. In just 2 hours, the vibrant Colombian city of Armero was obliterated, buried beneath 5 meters of solidified sediment. More than 23,000 people died, making it the second deadliest volcanic disaster of the 20th century. Yet, this is not a tale of unavoidable fate. This is a crucial 8-hour window where the catastrophe could have been averted. Geologists from INGEOMINAS issued clear warnings, delivering detailed hazard maps showing exactly where the deadly mudflows would sweep. But bureaucracy, denial, and arrogance silenced science. Between the first definitive sign of eruption and the moment the lahar struck the city, there were 8 hours. 8 hours, enough time to save everyone. As Colombia mourned 23,000 lost lives, the world watched in horror, realizing this was not a natural tragedy. It was a monumental failure of human responsibility. Who failed the people of Armero? And why did they ignore the clock? We revisit the fatal countdown that condemned an entire city. The fatal countdown began long before Armero even heard the first tremor. In the early 1980s, Armero, Colombia, was a tropical paradise at the base of the Andes, known as the White City for its lush cotton crops. Life was serene, sustained by the very rivers that flowed down from the towering Nevado del Ruiz. For 69 years, the local populace had referred to Ruiz as the sleeping giant. They believed the threat was purely theoretical, but geology is indifferent to local faith. In September 1985, only 2 months before the disaster, international geologists confirmed what seismic instruments had been screaming. The volcano was reawakening. Technical reports from INGEOMINAS warned explicitly of a high risk of lahars, devastating flows of volcanic mud, predicting the path these destructive rivers would follow. These maps marked Armero directly in the maximum risk zone. These warnings, the difference between life and death, were tragically buried in bureaucratic inertia. The decisive day, November 13, 1985, started with localized panic. In the afternoon, the sky over Armero darkened as a strange ash began to fall. Local officials, keen to prevent disruption, dismissed it as harmless dust. They told the 29,000 residents to remain calm. It was a fatal reassurance. At 3:06 p.m. local time, the Nevado del Ruiz erupted in a phreatic explosion. A vertical column of ash, steam, and rock fragments soared into the atmosphere. Yet, this initial explosion was not the killer. The true catastrophe was the 8-hour error. For 8 excruciating hours following the eruption, 3.5 billion cubic meters of ice and snow at the volcano's summit began to melt, mixing with boiling rock, pumice, and ash, coalescing into the largest lahar ever recorded in Colombian history. These flows, carrying boulders the size of cars, picked up terrifying speed, over 60 kilometers per hour, For 8 hours, they traveled down the mountain's flanks, gathering force, aimed directly at the unsuspecting town. At 11 p.m., under the cover of absolute darkness, the Lahar struck. There was no warning siren, no official evacuation order. Armero was consumed by a torrent of viscous mud up to 40 meters high. In less than 15 minutes, the White City was wiped from the map, leaving behind a 40-square-kilometer debris field. The result was instantaneous devastation. 23,000 people vanished. This was the third deadliest volcanic eruption of the 20th century, a disaster not solely caused by nature, but guaranteed by man's inaction. The terrifying question remains, why, with 8 hours to spare, were the clear scientific warnings ignored, condemning an entire city to oblivion? The horrifying question persists. Why, with 8 hours to spare, were clear scientific warnings ignored, condemning an entire city to oblivion? The answer is not found in the unpredictable fury of nature, but in the predictable failures of humanity, rooted deep in the social and political architecture of Colombia in 1985. To understand the silence, we must first understand the noise. 1985 was a year of profound national crisis. Just days before the tragedy, Bogotá was reeling from the catastrophic siege of the Palace of Justice, November 6th-7th, a brutal event involving the M19 guerrillas that consumed the full attention of the national government, the military, and the media. In this atmosphere of political and internal conflict, warnings about a provincial volcano seemed to those in power a distant, manageable, or frankly, lesser concern. But for the geologists at INGEOMINAS, the signs were anything but distant. The Nevado del Ruiz, silent for 69 years, had begun to stir in December 1984. The alarm bells first truly rang on September 11, 1985, 2 months prior, when a sudden steam explosion showered Armero with ash. The scientific team, led by determined experts, worked feverishly, establishing monitoring stations and publishing hazard maps. These maps, based on meticulous analysis of geological history, clearly designated Armero as lying directly in the path of the most likely danger: the massive Lahar deposits left by previous eruptions. Armero, essentially, was built on an ancient graveyard of volcanic mud. Their data was unequivocal. They estimated a 75% probability of a destructive Lahar flow in the event of an eruption. Their conclusion? Immediate evacuation protocols were necessary. But here, the science collided violently with local politics and economic inertia. Local authorities dismissed the reports as alarmist, fearing the damage that evacuation orders would do to the vital rice and cotton harvests. They viewed the geologists not as saviors, but as economic saboteurs. A mayor in a nearby town, Mariquita, even claimed the warnings were orchestrated by the opposition to destabilize the regional economy. This willful rejection of expertise established the deadly precedent: local prosperity over public safety. When the final critical warnings arrived on the morning of November 13th, the system was already paralyzed by denial. INGEOMINAS warned that seismic activity was rising sharply. The local civil defense waited for direct orders from Bogotá, which were slow to materialize, lost in the chaotic bureaucracy focused on the capital's instability. Crucially, in Armero itself, the warnings received via telegraph and radio were not immediately relayed to the public. Local officials actively countermanded precautionary measures, telling residents to remain calm and stay inside their homes. The absolute worst advice designed to prevent panic rather than save lives. Between 3:06 p.m. and 9:08 p.m. that day, the Nevado del Ruiz experienced a series of tremors, culminating in the major eruption that began melting the ice cap. Scientists were screaming into the void, but the administrative machinery was stuck in neutral. The 8 hours evaporated in bureaucratic indecision, political turf wars, and a fundamental arrogance that assumed scientists, often seen as outsiders, didn't understand the local realities. When the volcanic material mixed with the mountain's 10% ice cap, the resulting lahar, a lethal mixture of water, mud, rock, and debris, was unstoppable. Traveling at speeds estimated between 30 to 50 kilometers per hour, it needed only 4 hours to reach Armero. But the city had already sealed its fate hours earlier, when the decision was made silently to ignore the inconvenient truth. 23,000 people died not because a volcano erupted, but because a government refused to listen. This failure of governance transcended mere incompetence. It was a devastating choice. And in the chilling darkness that followed the Lahar's passage, one figure would emerge, embodying the full, agonizing cost of that fatal error. In the end, the critical 8 hours between the first definitive warning and the Lahar's arrival were filled not with decisive action, but with a fatal, bureaucratic inertia. The speed of the eruption and the subsequent mudslide was terrifying, a force of nature unmatched by human response. Armero was destroyed in mere minutes, claiming 23,000 lives. The town became not just a casualty of geology, but a perpetual monument to systemic failure. Nevado del Ruiz, despite its devastating fury, is not the sole villain in this chapter of history. The true error was fundamentally human. The catastrophic failure to heed science, the refusal to sound the alarm until it was hopelessly late. The scale of the tragedy forces us to confront the chilling question. How many thousands of lives could have been spared if the mandatory evacuation order had been issued within those precious 8 hours? Armero might not have become a ruin, but a powerful global testament to successful risk mitigation. The agonizing memory of November 13, 1985, and the silent, resilient image of Omayra Sánchez remains Colombia's starkest warning. When clear scientific knowledge is suppressed or ignored for political convenience, the result is an avoidable catastrophe of biblical proportions. The price of that silence was paid entirely by the innocent. This was just one of the days that shaped our world. Tomorrow, we will publish another significant historical event. To ensure you don't miss it, subscribe to The Day That Changed Everything now and activate notifications. What other day would you like to see featured here? Comment below.